What is up, you guys? Welcome back to the channel and welcome to another gruesome Get Ready With Me video. If this is your first time seeing my face,
Hi.
My name is Jessica, and every week I sit down here and I tell you guys about a true crime case whilst I put on my makeup. So if that sounds like something that you might like to stick around and be a part of, then I highly suggest subscribing to the channel and maybe even liking this video. Those kind of things really help out the channel so much, and I greatly appreciate you for doing so. On the flip side of that though, if you're like, yeah, I think I hate this, that's cool. Everyone's entitled to an opinion, even if it's wrong. No, I'm totally joking. I obviously know that this type of content isn't for everyone. That is why I have graciously taken the time to list some other creators down in the description box that have covered today's story in a way that perhaps you might enjoy more. Yes, I am incredibly kind and generous. Thank you so much for saying so. And with that noble offering, let's go ahead and get into today's case. Okay, so not only is today's case a request from one of you guys, but it was the very first case I received via my case request submission form, which, if you don't know, I do have a form you can fill out to request a case for me to cover. It's always linked in the description box. And this video right here serves as proof that if you fill out that form, I will eventually cover the case you request. As of right now, I'm planning to try and do a requested case like every other week or so, and I'll most likely try to do them in the order they're requested in. So I want to extend a big thank you to Christian J for not only requesting this case, but also for getting the ball rolling and being the first one to fill out the case request form. Thank you so much, Christian. Your support is greatly appreciated. Today, we're going to be talking about a case that has bothered me ever since the first time I heard about it, just because it is like shrouded in mystery. It also bothers me because there is so much polarizing and conflicting information out there regarding this case, and to say that it was overwhelming to research and intimidating to try and put together into a cohesive, structured video outline, that would be a massive understatement. So before we really get going, let me say this. It was outrageously difficult to verify the exact timeline of this case as far as what times exactly specific things may have happened. When I was doing my research, every source I looked at seemed to list the time that certain things happened at as slightly different than whatever I had referenced previously. I've done my absolute best to piece things together and to paint as clear of a picture as I could, but please be aware that it is entirely possible that some of the times I've listed for specific events may be off by as much as like 30 or even 45-ish minutes. All that to say that if you're familiar with this case, which you likely will be, so if you are, and you hear something and you're like, I thought that so-and-so said that that thing happened at blank time. They probably did say that. And I also probably saw a source that listed that time for that event as well. But again, the exact timeline in this case is murky at best. So please just bear with me as we discuss the extremely bizarre disappearance of Karlie Guse. Karlie Lane Guse was born on May 13th, 2002. In Bishop, California, to her parents Lindsay Fairley and Zachary Guse. Karlie was their second child, with Lindsay having given birth to her older brother Kane just a few years earlier. Sadly though, it was only about 2 years after Karlie was born that Zach and Lindsay decided to separate, which catapulted she and her brother into a very different kind of family dynamic. Initially following the separation, Kane and Karlie lived with Lindsay, but when Lindsay decided to move to Las Vegas in 2012, Karlie and Kane decided that they didn't really want to move 270 miles away from everything they'd ever known. So instead, they decided that they'd rather move in with Zach and his new wife, Melissa, and stay in Bishop. Zach and Melissa had been married for about a year at that point, and they also had 2 additional sons of their own. So when Kane and Karlie moved in, the 6 of them became one big, happy, blended family. Now, what's ironic is following the family mashup, Zach and Melissa actually decided that they were going to move out of Bishop as well, but they only moved about 10 miles away into the White Mountain Estates neighborhood, which was just north of Bishop near Chalfont Valley, California. And unlike the prospect of moving to Nevada, this move didn't really seem to like faze Karlie at all, because despite the fact that, yeah, now she lived a little bit further out, she was able to stay at the same high school she was already attending, and she still lived close enough to Bishop that she was able to frequently see and still spend time with all her friends. At the time our story takes place, Karlie attended Bishop Union High School, and by all accounts, she was just your average, typical teenage girl. She was funny, she was kind, she was compassionate, she was a loving sister, and as far as I could find, she was just an all-around good kid. That said, even the best kids aren't impervious to getting in trouble from time to time, and Karlie was certainly no exception to that fact. Right around the time we're focusing on today, Karlie was actually in the midst of dealing with the consequences of a recent faux pas at school where she'd actually been busted token up. Yes, she was allegedly partaking in a little recreational use of the devil's lettuce on school property, and unfortunately she happened to get caught. Obviously, school officials weren't soups stoked about all of this, and ultimately the disciplinary route they opted to take was a suspension. Now, I have no idea how long Karlie was suspended from school for this, but I do know that in addition to her suspension, she was also required to start attending counseling. On top of all of that, it's also been said that around the same time, Karlie's grades had also started to decline, so while she certainly wasn't like going totally off the rails, it does seem like some slightly concerning things might have been starting to creep their way to the surface in the weeks leading up to her disappearance. Which brings us to the evening of Friday, October 12th, 2018. Karlie left her house that evening under the guise that she was going to a football game with her boyfriend and some of her friends. However, she and her friends actually had every intention of skipping the football game and going to a party instead. Now, it's worth mentioning that Karlie's boyfriend Donald has actually spoken out in the past to clarify that they weren't at a party per se, that in actuality they were just at a friend's house, hanging out with a few people and smoking some green. That said, every single source that you look at says party, so take that for whatever you want, I guess. But party, small gathering with friends, whatever it was, the point is that Karlie was not at a football game like her parents believed she was. And they actually didn't get a chance to speak with her or to check in with her at all that night until around 8 o'clock when Melissa called Karlie to make sure that she wasn't going to need a ride home. And Karlie assured her that she wouldn't. She said she was going to get a ride home from Donald, which I guess had always been the plan. However, it was barely a half hour later that Melissa received a phone call from Karlie, and she sounded absolutely terrified. She was begging Melissa to not only come pick her up and to do it as quickly as possible, but she also said that she was so scared that she didn't want Melissa to get off of the phone with her until she'd gotten there to pick her up. And when later asked about this, the other kids at the party said that after being there for a while, Karlie had all of a sudden gotten like super paranoid and started acting really erratic. And I guess this all must have happened sometime between 8 and 8:30 because from what I could gather, she sounded perfectly fine when she was on the phone with Melissa the first time. But then when she had called Melissa about a half hour later is when she was just absolutely beside herself. For what it's worth, the other kids at the party did try to comfort Karlie. Donald even tried to get her to just leave with him so that they could go somewhere, I guess, calmer or less stimulating. I don't know. I do know that he said that she, at this point, was scared of everything. The other people at the party, the music, and even of him. He was eventually able to convince her to go outside with him, where he, again, tried to calm her down. But she just kept getting more and more freaked out until she was completely frantic, to the point where no matter what anyone did, nothing was gonna calm her down. Eventually, she ended up just running off, like away from Donald altogether, and I guess that was when she called Melissa. She told her that she needed to be picked up outside the Highlands mobile home community, and that the faster she could get there, the better. Melissa did try to ask Karlie what on earth she was so scared of, but Karlie never really gave her a straight answer. And obviously this worried Melissa for the safety of her stepdaughter, so she jumped in her car and she raced to the mobile home park. However, when she got there, Karlie was nowhere to be found. Thankfully, though, it did only take Melissa a few minutes of driving around to track down where Karlie had made it off to. She actually found her walking frantically around Dixon Lane Bridge with her cell phone flashlight on. The cell phone flashlight was actually the only reason that Melissa even saw Karlie. She saw the light bobbing up and down. If she hadn't seen that, she honestly might not have tracked her down at all. Okay, so I had to take this eye off and completely redo it. So just, if it looks different, that's why. Anyways, okay, so Karlie's found, not where she said she was going to be. She's running around. She's freaked out. She's got her cell phone light on. I don't know if she's looking for something or just trying to see where she's going. We don't know. And when she finally sees Melissa's car, she ran straight for it, clearly still terrified, and jumped in the backseat. But Karlie's erratic behavior certainly did not stop there. I mean, it was weird enough that she got in the back seat rather than in the passenger seat up with Melissa. But then on top of that, throughout the entire car ride, she kept shifting around in the back seat and talking about how she was scared of the car and how she thought that it was going to kill her. And finally, this prompted Melissa to, be like, what the hell is going on? And that's when Karlie was finally honest with her, explaining that she had not gone to the football game and instead she'd gone to a party with some of her friends and, Now, there is definitely a lot of speculation out there regarding what Karlie may or may not have actually been on that night. A lot of people think she sounds a little more out of it than someone who had simply just smoked a little green. And I mean, I totally get where those people are coming from. I used to get really paranoid back in the day when I would hang out with MJ, and I've had my fair share of bad experiences. I've seen other people have bad experiences, but I personally have never seen anyone react to just plain weed the way that Melissa reported that Karlie was acting. Does that mean that it can't happen? No, and I'm going to get into that a little later, but that's just my personal experience, and with that being my experience, I can understand why other people don't really believe that she was just smoking weed. They believe that something more was going on. And when Zach saw Karlie after she got home with Melissa, he echoed that same sentiment. He believed that either she'd done something more than she was willing to admit, or that if she truly believed all that she had done was smoke some pot, then he vehemently believed that whatever she'd smoked had to have been laced with something else. He didn't think that there was any other way that marijuana could facilitate the reaction and the behavior that his daughter was exhibiting. And whatever was going on with her definitely did seem to be lasting longer than, like, your typical marijuana high. Even well into being back at her parents' house, her skin was pale, her pupils were dilated, and she kept bouncing back and forth between telling Melissa and Zach that she was scared of them and she hated them, to telling them that she loved them and that she was so happy to be home. She would freak out anytime that she even thought that Melissa was going to leave her side. So much so that she wouldn't even let Melissa go alone into the bathroom to brush her teeth that evening. She wanted to go with her. And from what you can gather by looking into that night, it seems like Melissa was really kind and patient with Karlie. She claims that she spent hours trying to sober Karlie up and that she stayed up with her into the wee hours of the morning just doing whatever Karlie requested. They painted their nails together, they watched some movies, they colored, and at some points they just sat around and talked. And eventually, when they started to get tired and Melissa suggested that they should go to bed, Karlie agreed, but only under the condition that Melissa stay in her room and sleep next to her, which Melissa did agree to do. In Melissa's initial report, she stated that Karlie finally fell asleep right around 5:30, at which time Melissa, using Karlie's phone, texted a few of Karlie's friends, which, okay, I don't know their family dynamic, but thinking of myself as a teenager, if my mom would have done that, one, I would have thought that it was really weird, and two, I likely would have been kind of pissed off, but again, I don't know and can't speak to how Karlie would have felt about this, but I don't think I would have liked it, and it's weird. I think. But regardless what I think about it, the fact of the matter is that the last of these texts reportedly went out around 5:30, which was right after Melissa said that Karlie had fallen asleep. And then, again, according to Melissa's initial report, she then fell asleep shortly thereafter. Now, supposedly, she did wake up again briefly after this. She claims that she woke up and rolled over and looked at Karlie, whom supposedly she saw just laying there awake, wide-eyed, staring off into space. But considering the fact that she was still safely laying in bed next to her, Melissa, I guess, just dozed back off. And as if everything they'd already been through hadn't seemed chaotic enough to last them a lifetime, it actually wouldn't be until Melissa fully woke up later that morning that the true chaos would start. Now, initially, Melissa reported, and I keep saying Melissa's initial report or initial story because as we get further along, you'll see that there have definitely been some discrepancies in the recall of how this is all played out. So I'm just going to try and stick to explaining things how they were explained at the time as chronologically as I possibly can. So according to Melissa's initial report, she woke up just a few hours after she'd fallen asleep, roughly around like 7:15 in the morning. She woke up in Karlie's bed to find that Karlie was gone. I don't think that her first thought when she realized that Karlie wasn't in her bed was that something was wrong. But as she made her way through the house and not only didn't see Karlie anywhere, but also saw that their front door was slightly open, that's when she was hit with the feeling that something did not seem right. She immediately went into her bedroom and woke Zach up and told him that she couldn't find Karlie. And understandably, having just woken up, Zach was really confused. He's like, what do you mean you can't find Karlie? And Melissa's like, I mean, she's not in the house. She's not outside. I can't find her. And that's when Zach jumped up and I guess did his own once over of the house. They asked the other kids if they'd seen Karlie or if they'd heard her leave that morning, which they hadn't. And so they went outside to kind of look around their immediate property, but they didn't find her there either. In fact, the only thing that they found directly outside of their house was a shoe print that they believed to be Karlie's. But other than that, they had nothing. Their initial hope was that maybe Karlie had gone out on a walk to try and clear her head from all the drama from the night before. But given that the last time they'd seen her, she'd been in an incredibly vulnerable state of mind, her wandering about around town alone still didn't sound awesome to them, especially once they realized that her phone and purse had been left behind. So they had no way of getting in contact with her and no way of checking on her to know or see if she was okay. So at this point, they're like, all right, let's not panic. We'll just hop in our cars. We'll drive around a bit. Surely we will find her. She cannot possibly have gone that far. But even after searching separately in their own respective vehicles for almost 2 hours, neither Zach or Melissa found Karlie. They also didn't find anything that might be able to help them figure out where she could have gone. They came up completely empty-handed. By the time they got back home, they were starting to realize just how serious the situation was. So Zach made the decision to call Lindsay and let her in on what was going on, to let her know that her daughter was missing. It was just after 9:30 a.m. on Sunday, October 13th, when Lindsay's phone rang, and she had no idea that the news on the other end of that phone call was going to change her life forever. When she saw that it was her ex-husband, she answered the phone, and the first thing out of Zach's mouth after Lindsay said hello was, "Karlie's gone." And there is a lot of chatter about this phone call and this phrase specifically, and if it could have potentially held a deeper and more sinister message. And okay, do I think it's a weird choice of words? Maybe, but I also don't know Zach. I don't know how he typically speaks. I don't know his particular brand of vernacular. But Lindsay has stated basically from the get-go that this choice of wording in that moment was and still is deeply distressing to her. She said that when she first heard him say Karlie's gone, that she actually thought that Zach was trying to tell her that Karlie was dead. And to clarify, I'm a worst case scenario type of bitch in every situation. And while I guess knowing what I know now, I can see both sides, I personally don't think that even me, worst case scenario all the time, I don't think even I would have jumped so quickly to death. But That said, I really can't factually speak on how I would have digested the information if I were Lindsay, because I've never been in that situation. The point is, he said it, Lindsay's been vocal that it bothered her, and I figured it was worth noting because it does come up again. Anyways, once Zach had corrected Lindsay and explained to her that Karlie was just missing at this point, and, kind of what had gone on the night before, Lindsay immediately hopped in her car and she began the 2-hour drive to Mono County. All right, and with that, I need to take a quick break, throw on my lashes, and when we come back, the search for Karlie truly begins. Don't go nowhere. Okay, so once Zach was off the phone with Lindsay, he called the Mono County Sheriff's Department and he formally reported Karlie missing. Police then made their way out to the White Mountain Estates area to begin a more calculated and organized search for Karlie. However, despite their quick response time, police did initially believe that Karlie was a runaway. So I don't know if it was the fact that she was potentially still intoxicated and that she had clearly been in a delicate mental state the night before that made them treat this situation with more urgency than we typically tend to see police departments treat what they believe to be runaway situations. But whatever the reason, they did immediately begin canvassing the area, which ultimately led to 3 different supposed eyewitness sightings of Karlie from that morning. Now, the first 2 witnesses actually knew Karlie, so according to investigators, there is no reason to question their credibility. The first of the witnesses was a man named Richard Eddy. He lived on the same street as the Guses, and that morning, he'd been sitting in his sunroom, drinking his coffee, when he noticed who is now believed to have been Karlie walking by somewhere between 6:30 and 6:45 a.m. And he said he remembers this so vividly because something just seemed off about the girl. He said that she was, quote, looking up, looking around at the sky with a piece of paper in her hands. It was kind of unusual. We don't have a lot of kids out walking. Unquote. The second witness was Kenneth Dutton. He lived down the street and around the corner from the Guses, and he claimed to have seen Karlie walking that morning, and he also said that he noticed that she'd been holding a piece of paper. I've seen speculation that this piece of paper could have been anything from paperwork from the counseling she was attending to perhaps a map. But obviously, no one knows for certain what this supposed piece of paper actually was. And the third and final witness that police spoke to was a person who'd supposedly seen a young girl matching Karlie's description about a mile from the Guses' home at the corner of Highway 6, and this girl was mysteriously standing inside a barbed wire fence. And this sighting is said to have taken place anywhere between 7 and 7:30 a.m. Now, I'll say right here that there is a lot of concern surrounding Karlie being a young girl alone near a highway as far as abduction and human trafficking goes, but I am going to get into that more in depth when I go over possible theories towards the end of the story. So please don't think I'm glossing over that portion, just hang in there with me, okay? So to aid in this search for Karlie, police had deployed some pretty extensive resources. We're talking helicopters, ATVs, search dogs, whatever they had available that morning, they put it to use. And by this point, Lindsay had also made it to Chalfont Valley. However, Lindsay opted out of participating in the physical search for Karlie. She said she just simply couldn't go out and look for her because she was too distraught. And I will tell you what, Melissa and Zach, they did not like that. And I have to be honest, at first, it didn't sit right with me either. I was like, how could you possibly not go out and search? Like, if it was me, you wouldn't be able to get me home and just blah, 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 blah. But when I took a step back, which I think is important to do when you feel yourself making snap judgments, I think you need to step back and you really have to try to be completely objective. Just because we think that we would react a certain way to a situation does not mean that that's how everyone would or even should react to that same situation. Just because we think we'd be out there, boots on the ground and running ourselves ragged, does not mean that we can 100% for sure expect that same reaction from someone else. Everyone has a different decision-making process. Everyone's ability to handle stress is different. I mean, that's why they tell you not to judge someone's affect in the wake of a tragedy to begin with. Like, don't judge how they behave on a 911 call or something. All this to say that I don't think that we as third-party outsiders are really in a position to pass that kind of judgment on to Lindsay. But Zach and Melissa have made it clear that they were definitely incredibly bothered by this. They did not think that Lindsay was doing enough to help find Karlie. Even without Lindsay, like I said, there was already a huge effort going on to try and find Karlie. There were searchers all over the desert looking around, hoping to find her. By this point, they were operating under the assumption that she was wandering around, lost and confused somewhere, and hoping that ultimately they'd stumble onto her eventually. However, that never happened. And so at, I think, around hour 10, out of what I can only imagine was sheer desperation, Melissa started going live on Facebook, explaining to all of her Facebook friends her perspective on what had happened and essentially just begging people to keep their eyes peeled and to be on the lookout for Karlie. And while this does make sense to a certain degree, I mean, what tool spreads information faster than social media? Probably nothing. But these Facebook Lives, in retrospect, did end up casting a lot of public suspicion onto Melissa because it seemed like her story changed a lot over the course of the weeks following Karlie's disappearance. Initially, she'd claimed that she'd woken up in Karlie's bed and that that's when she noticed she was missing. But later, she said that she woke up in her own bed, walked around the house and checked on all the kids like she did every morning. She said she did this around 5:45 in the morning and that at that point, everything was fine. But that when she then went around and checked on them again at 7:30, that's when she realized that Karlie was missing. Additionally, she'd first reported that Karlie had last been seen wearing a white t-shirt and skinny jeans, but it seemed like as soon as she heard the eyewitnesses' stories that she started to change her story again to match theirs, that Karlie had actually been wearing gray sweatpants and a white t-shirt when she'd last seen her. When confronted with this, she explained it by saying that Karlie just had too many clothes for her to accurately assume what might have been missing, like what Karlie might have worn out. And while sure, this could easily just be an overwhelmed stepmother frantically trying to get out information as fast as she can and then realizing that perhaps she misspoke later. But even so, when we're talking about something like this, you can guarantee that people are going to jump to speculation if they see any discrepancies in someone's story. Lindsay was also not very supportive of Melissa's Facebook Lives. She, along with a lot of the public, thought that it seemed like Melissa was exploiting Karlie's disappearance in an effort to gain attention for herself, which obviously Melissa denies. If I have not made it abundantly clear, Melissa and Zach and Lindsay, they don't really see eye to eye on much. They did seem to be working well together at first, despite what Lindsay refers to as some red flags. But I think it was when Lindsay found out about a recording that Melissa had taken of Karlie the night before she went missing that kind of a rift began to form between the three of them. And this recording is probably one of the most widely speculated on pieces of evidence, information, whatever you want to call it. This recording, I feel like, has become a huge topic of discussion when it comes to this case and to Karlie's disappearance. Now, if you're not familiar with this case, you may be wondering what the hell I'm talking about, an audio recording. So basically what this recording was exactly was an audio recording of Karlie from the night before she disappeared. And it was basically, from my understanding, about an 8-ish minute audio excerpt from Karlie's paranoid episode. Melissa has always claimed that she took the recording in order to show it to Karlie the next morning, almost to kind of teach her a lesson, like, look, this is how you were acting last night, this is how you behave on drugs, so maybe it's time to, like, cool it a little, you know? But Lindsay has taken serious issue with this recording, which, by the way, has never been released to the public, so only a few people know exactly what's on it. Those people being Lindsay, Zach, Melissa, the investigators, of course, and Mr. Philip McGraw, otherwise known as Dr. Phil, but we'll get into all that. The main issue that Lindsay seems to have with this recording is that, according to her, Karlie asked Melissa on that recording to call 911, and according to Lindsay, Melissa said that she would, but then she never did. And then later, she flat out refuses, despite Karlie's desperate pleas to do so. Now, Melissa refutes this 100%. She claims that Karlie did not ask her to call 911, but rather asked her if she would call 911 in the event that something were to happen to her. And Melissa says she promised that she would, but that nothing was wrong. So basically that Karlie didn't need to worry, that they were not going to have to call 911. And this whole 911 call has become a huge point of strife between the family, because obviously Melissa and Zach didn't think that a 911 call or a trip to the emergency room was necessary, where Lindsay believes that Karlie was in the middle of an overdose, and that if Melissa had called 911 or if they had taken her to the hospital, that perhaps she would still be here. Lindsay actually believes that when Melissa claims to have woken up briefly and noticed Karlie eyes wide staring off into space, Lindsay actually thinks that Karlie had already passed away at that moment. And I guess she believes that Melissa's taking some nuggets of truth and rolling them into her story, taking a page out of Casey Anthony's book. That, I don't know. Obviously, based on the fact that we've heard Melissa's story, and even with all the varying information that she's provided, we know for certain that she denies having woken up to find Karlie dead and then subsequently covering it up. And anywhere you look while researching this case, you can find people who believe every side. And not just those two sides, there are people who buy into every single theory that has come to light since Karlie's disappearance. And unfortunately, a lot of focus has actually seemed to shift from finding Karlie more to the drama that's going on within the family. And that is a perfect segue to bring us right back around to Dr. Phil. Yes, everyone's favorite TV doctor that's not really a doctor featured Karlie's family in a 2-part series on his show where, sure, he discussed Karlie's disappearance, but it more so seemed to really dive into the tension that was going on between Karlie's parents. And there were actually multiple altercations between the three of them. And I don't know, you can watch it on Dr. Phil's YouTube channel if you want, but in my opinion, the whole thing was kind of just exploitative and icky. Then again, I have to assume that most of us don't really expect much else from Mr. McGraw, but I digress. Speaking of exploitative and icky, there have also been some really outrageous internet spectacles that have seemed to almost capitalize on everyone's desperation to find Karlie. The first was a YouTube video posted by a creator named Joey Mack, a sponsored video, mind you, where he seems to intentionally mislead you into believing for almost 30 minutes that he had found Karlie wandering around in the mountains, only to tell you in the last few moments that turns out wasn't her. This video has amassed 22 million views since it was posted back in 2019, and despite being called out by multiple creators for this intentional deception, the thumbnail for that video to this day continues to brandish Karlie's photo accompanied by the title, "Found Missing Teen in Mountains." And while I, for one, think the concept of posting the actual footage of finding a teenage runaway onto YouTube, by the way, that's what the situation ended up being. It was a teenage girl who'd run away and she was hiding out in the woods with her boyfriend for a few days. And I think the concept of posting a video of that situation actually unfolding in real time is weird enough in and of itself. But then to purposefully use Karlie's photo in order to drive traffic to your YouTube video that has nothing to do with her, in my opinion, is super gross. And even if I wanted to play devil's advocate, which, to be honest, in this situation, I really don't, but for argument's sake, let's say that he really thought he found Karlie, just for that split second before he realized that he hadn't. Obviously, by the time he posts his video, he knows that he hasn't. So why can't he at least, if anything, be honest in the title and name it, "I thought I found Karlie Guse"? At least then it's implied that he actually hadn't found her, because, okay, so I know what I'm about to say is a long shot, but go with me for a second. What if someone saw the title and saw the thumbnail and didn't have time to watch the video, but took it to mean oh wow, they found that girl. And then later, that same person actually saw Karlie somewhere. I know, like I said, it's a 1 in a billion chance, but we all know crazy shit happens, so just, yeah. So what if then that person sees Karlie and they don't think that it's necessary to report it at this point, because as far as they know, she's been found and everything's good. I don't know. I know that situation isn't like super realistic, but I just think it's really irresponsible to purposefully spread misleading information. And then the second bananas ass internet phenomenon that somehow seemed to glob onto Karlie's disappearance is the YouTube channel Kate Yup. I have to assume that most of you know about this, but just in case you don't, high level overview. Kate Yup is a mukbang channel that features a girl going absolutely disgustingly bananas on an outrageous amount of seafood. And for a while, people started to believe that Kate was actually Karlie. And the reason that people were able to even get such a preposterous rumor ball rolling was because in her videos, Kate is always blindfolded. She never speaks, and sometimes she seems like she has like weird cuts and bruises all over her. I think in one video, one of her teeth fell out or something. I mean, no offense to people who watch and enjoy mukbang channels, but I am super grossed out by Kate's channel. I know you didn't ask, but yeah, it's not for me. Anyways, people started to speculate that perhaps whoever this Kate person was actually being held against her will and forced to participate in this production. And then over time, the hostage theory somehow morphed into people believing that Kate was Karlie being held against her will. And even though all you have to do is simply look at the dates to prove that that's literally not even possible, yes, it's really that easy. Kate's first video was posted in April of 2018, but Karlie didn't go missing until like 6 months later in October of that same year. So logistically, it's impossible for Kate to be Karlie, but people really believed this for, I feel like, a while. And like I said, the Kate Yup channel is freaky and weird and gross, but if you're going to start a potentially harmful internet rumor, at least check your dates and make sure that what you're saying is even possible. But like also don't start an internet rumor that could potentially interfere with an ongoing missing persons investigation. Just a thought. And unfortunately, Karlie's case is still just that. An ongoing missing persons case. Despite how long it's been, despite the dedicated police work that went into investigating her disappearance, and despite the immense public interest in her case, Karlie Guse remains a missing person to this day. And because it's been so long, it's given plenty of time for rumors and theories and speculation to continue to circulate. And after almost 4.5 years, we are all still just left wondering, where on earth is Karlie Guse? And to attempt to answer that question, there's 4 what I would call main theories that have kind of stuck over the course of the whole investigation. But before I get into them, I do just want to remind you that nobody knows where Karlie is or what might have happened to her. So the following scenarios are just theories, and they cannot at this time be substantiated by fact. And I most certainly am not trying to present them here as anything more than just potential situations to consider. Do your own research, form your own opinions. Okay, so I'm going to go in order from what I believe to be like completely over the top, out of this world, unlikely, to what I believe is the most likely scenario. So the theory that I believe to be the least realistic possibility is that Karlie was murdered by one of her own family members. And people have gotten real carried away with this one. Some even speculating that Melissa dressed up like Karlie and walked around outside that day, and that she was actually who the eyewitnesses had seen walking. But I personally, I don't think that that's what happened. I don't see that a murder took place in the Guse household, and police didn't even find a shred of evidence to point them in that direction. Yeah, I don't buy it. And I certainly don't think that they could have adequately disguised a crime scene or gotten rid of Karlie's body in the short amount of time between when the recording was taken of Karlie and the time that she was reported missing. So in my opinion, that's just, I don't think that one's an option. And I know I'm going to get a ton of backlash for that because that is a really widely believed theory. The next theory is that Karlie suffered an overdose, and whether it was in the home and her dad and stepmom covered it up, or whether it happened like out in the desert after she left the house is widely debated. But regardless, I don't personally subscribe to this theory either. Now, it should go without saying that I am not a doctor, I'm not an expert on drugs, and I really don't know a lot about overdoses. But from what I could find, on average, if a person is going to overdose, typically it happens within 1 to 3 hours. So frankly, the thought of her overdosing in the desert almost 12 hours after doing any drugs, I don't think that it happened. And if Karlie had suffered an accidental overdose at the house, why on earth would Melissa and Zach take it upon themselves to cover it up? If they didn't kill her, it does not make sense to me why they would do that. I just don't feel like there would be a reason to. Oh, and while we're on the subject of drugs, let's journey back to the fact that there is not a single piece of content regarding this case that you will find that does not call into question Mary Jane's ability to wig someone out the way that Karlie was allegedly wigging out without being laced with something harder. And again, admittedly, I did initially fall on that side of the argument. However, I did a lot of research on this topic in particular because I was genuinely curious if it was possible or not. And it turns out, seems like it totally could have happened. For starters, it has never made sense to me that the weed would have been laced with something, but no one else seemed to react the way that Karlie did. And two, here is some information I found that opened my mind, if you will. According to the National Institute on Drug Abuse, which I would assume is a pretty reputable source, people have reported symptoms such as anxiety and paranoia with cannabis use, and in rare cases, they've even reported an extreme psychotic reaction, including delusions and hallucinations. Sound familiar? From what I can gather, marijuana can function as a stimulant, a depressant, or a hallucinogen, and how a person reacts depends on their individual biochemistry, health conditions, mental health, and hormones. So theoretically, it could affect two people very, very differently, even if it's the same strain used in the same context or situation. There's also research out there, which I also found via the National Institute on Drug Abuse, that has found that people who use marijuana and carry a specific variant of a specific gene are at increased risk of developing psychosis. Obviously, when it specifically pertains to Karlie, this is all just conjecture, but it's certainly interesting, especially when you factor in how deeply some people believe that simple marijuana could not have accounted for Karlie's behavior the night before her disappearance. You know, it's just something to chew on. Oh, and something else that I see a lot is police need to track down whoever she got the pot from. And I just want to put it out there that they actually did arrest an 18-year-old boy on allegations that Karlie had gotten weed from him on October 12th. I don't know if it was the same specific weed that she and her friends had smoked at the party, but the kid did end up pleading guilty to contributing to the delinquency of a minor. So yeah. On to the third most discussed and most common theory in Karlie's disappearance, which is that it was an abduction, that someone saw her near Highway 6 and saw that she was disoriented, and they took the opportunity to kidnap her, either to subsequently murder her, or there is a lot of talk surrounding human trafficking when it comes to where Karlie might be. And I get that, even though I think that, you know, we all know that human trafficking is a huge problem. The scary thing is that I don't think we even know the half of it, which, if I think about for long enough, will keep me up at night. And the fact that Karlie was supposedly last seen by a big highway is even more concerning. If you're unfamiliar, because I sure was, Highway 6 is a 3,200-mile straight shot across the country. And it is a well-known fact that victims of human trafficking are very often targeted at truck stops or near highways because it is so easy for these people to then just get really far away really quickly, which could explain why no sign of her has ever been found. I mentioned that they employed scent dogs during the search efforts for Karlie, and the dogs did manage to pick up on Karlie's scent, which they followed until they lost it. And they lost it at the intersection of Highway 6 and White Mountain Estates Road. So could that be indicative of her having left that spot in a vehicle? Perhaps, but I've also seen it stated that they lost her scent due to high winds. So once again, I guess it's up for your interpretation. And then, finally, the theory that I personally believe is most likely is that Karlie deliriously wandered out of the house, out into the desert, and she got lost somewhere and ultimately succumbed to the elements. The reason that I believe this theory just a squeech more than the abduction theory is that there were no signs of an abduction near where Karlie was last seen. There were no scuffle marks in the dirt or anything like that. And I don't think that, given Karlie's heightened state of paranoia, that she would have voluntarily gotten into the car with a stranger. So if she was taken away in a vehicle, I feel like she would have had to have been forced into that vehicle, and there were just no signs of that. During Karlie's paranoid episode the night before she disappeared, she flipped on a dime multiple times between being super loving and affectionate towards Melissa and Zach to being scared of them and telling them that she hated them. So I personally think that she woke up, she saw that Melissa was sleeping, and she saw it as an opportunity to escape. Apparently, on the recording that Melissa took of Karlie, Karlie seemed to kind of cry out for Lindsay. Specifically, I think she called Melissa mom and then Melissa corrected her. And I bring this up because, remember, 2 of the witnesses claimed to have seen Karlie with a big piece of paper in her hands. And like I said, I've seen it speculated before that this could have been a map. And she was last seen by Highway 6, and Highway 6 leads straight into Nevada, where Lindsay lived. So is it possible that in her confused and disoriented state, maybe Karlie thought she could walk to her mom? I mean, obviously I don't know, and I haven't seen anyone else say that or speculate that. That's just, I guess, my own personal hypothesis, which is rooted in nothing other than my own interpretation of what I know about the case. I want to extend my deepest sympathies to Lindsay, Melissa, and Zach, as well as Karlie's siblings and friends. I cannot imagine what they've had to endure over the last 4 years, especially when it comes to all the rumors and the speculation and the suspicions that they've had to deal with. I have seen so many people openly share their shoulda, coulda, woulda statements, and to that I say, hindsight is 20/20. Of course, knowing what we know now, we can easily say that we would have done everything differently. But the truth is that you don't know what you'll do until you have to do it. And God willing, none of us will ever have to make the decisions that Melissa and Zach had to make and that they undoubtedly question and regret to this day. Should they have taken Karlie to the hospital? Probably, but conversely, the explanation she gave for why she didn't does make sense. She thought Karlie was just having a bad trip, and while unpleasant, yes, I believe that she truly did not see how serious the situation really was in the moment. And not to get way off topic, but you ever go to the emergency room, especially via ambulance, and then have your insurance decide that your visit wasn't medically necessary? Yeah, that'll be a quick couple grand. And while obviously, yes, you cannot put a price on the well-being of a loved one, this is the reality of the kind of horrendous and unthinkable situations that the United States garbage healthcare system puts people in daily. Do I seek medical attention for this thing that's bothering me, risk finding out that it's nothing, and then have to pay the hospital a shit ton of money? Or do I ride it out, risk having it be serious, and then I die? Just decisions. Anyway, that is a very different discussion for a different day. And finally, I wish I didn't have to address this because I personally don't think that it's relevant at all to Karlie's disappearance. So I don't know that the family really wants this grouped in with her story. But I feel like if I don't mention it, people are going to get mad or wonder why. So here is what I'll say about it. So Zach was arrested for DV in February of 2021 after a particularly heated fight with Melissa. Because of this, I've seen some people speculate that this might mean that the Guse home was violent, and it might corroborate the theories that Karlie was murdered in her home. And I personally do not believe that. as far as I'm aware, there were never any allegations of violence in the home prior to Karlie's disappearance. And while I clearly do not condone Zach's actions, and I'm hopeful that following his arrest, he received whatever help he clearly needed, but unless we've been in that position, I cannot imagine the monumental toll it must take on a person to have their child disappear without a trace. I guarantee there are days that all of them feel like they're at the end of their rope and like they cannot handle anything else. And again, I am not in any way, shape, or form condoning what happened. There's never an excuse for violence of any kind, let alone violence against your own family. But how often do we see in these stories of children either being murdered or kidnapped or disappearing that the parents eventually separate because of the toll that it takes on them? So it's clearly very common for this kind of tragedy's effects to bleed over into the parental relationship. As far as I can tell, it seems like Zach and Melissa are still married, and I don't think that there have been any incidents reported since then. So like I said, I hate that I even had to talk about it, but I knew if I didn't, people would wonder why. So there you go. But beyond the drama, beyond the rumors, and beyond the theories, please leave here today remembering what is important. Karlie Lane Guse is still considered to be a missing person. She's last believed to have been wearing gray sweatpants or jeans, a white t-shirt, and Vans brand shoes. At the time of her disappearance, she was 5'7" and weighed roughly 110 pounds. She had long, dark blonde hair and a piercing in her left nostril. Karlie would be 21 years old today, and no matter the circumstances surrounding her disappearance, she deserves to be found, and her family deserves closure, and her community deserves answers. If by chance you have any information regarding the whereabouts of Karlie Guse or any information regarding her disappearance, please call the Mono County Sheriff's Office tip line at 760-932-5678 or send an email to karliegusetips@monosheriff.org. You can also contact the Sacramento office of the FBI by calling 916-746-7000, or you can submit a tip online at www.fbi.gov/tips. If you're out and about and you think you see Karlie, please immediately contact a law enforcement office within the jurisdiction you believe you see her. And with that, you guys, we are about wrapped for today. Let me know your thoughts on this case in the comments down below. Feel free to also leave your theories as to what you believe may have happened, but please make sure to keep it respectful. The family has been through enough, and I don't want the comment section on one of my videos to even have a chance of adding to that anguish. Thank you so much again to Christian for requesting that I cover this case. It honestly probably wasn't one that I would have ever covered on my own accord, just because it's a fairly widely covered case, but I'm actually so glad that I looked into it because there was a lot of information that I was completely unaware of. So I'm glad that I could put a lot of the stuff that I've seen scattered all over different sources into one concise and up-to-date video. If you have a case or a topic that you'd like to see me cover, please fill out the request submission form that I have linked in the description box. Like I said, I'm going to try and do requested cases like every other week, so I'm going to need at least 26 of them a year. If you haven't already and you'd like to, go ahead and subscribe to my channel and turn on the post notifications. I put out new videos every week, and I would love to see you back here in my next one. But until then, stay safe and have a good week. Bye, guys. Russian it. So when came... That's pretty. Because it's easier for, you know, to... What? Oh, no! You motherfucker. Let's try that again. Every fucking time with this. Do we like the green? Let me know. He clean? What? I just don't think it's supposed to be this hard. Supposed piece. What the fuck am I saying? For long enough will... Long enough? What?